voice, and we will get going. Okay, so welcome everybody to the Storying Our Futures launch event. You're all extremely welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Naomi Wiles, I'm the producer at Adverse Camber, and we're one of the two main partners in this project, along with ICPAC. So a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. Please stay on mute to help us hear the speakers. Feel free to use the chat, which you can find usually at the bottom of your screen, to make contact with anyone here. It would be lovely to hear about you, where you're from, where you're joining us from. We are reaching across 2 continents, at least for this session, possibly more. So if we have any connectivity challenges or technical challenges, please bear with us. And we're going to keep the event absolutely to an hour. So everybody just forgive me if I jump in to move things along. It's so that we can hear from everyone. So our task today is to introduce you to the Storying Our Futures Climate Resilience through Indigenous Knowledge project. We are launching 2 podcasts and telling you about a film that we've made over the course of the project. We're going to be sharing some experiences and learning from the project as a whole, and inviting you to 2 more in-depth sessions where we really want to get into conversation with you about the topics of storytelling, climate crisis, and activism. And importantly, we want to introduce you to the team of absolutely fantastic people who we've been working with on this project. These are Linda Ogallo and Calistus Wachana from ICPAC, who are our main project partners, Cath Heinemeyer, who's here on screen with me, and Hannah McDowell, who will be appearing by video, who have co-led the UK side of the project. We're really hoping to hear from Joseph Ngordeng, a South Sudanese journalist, whose experience of research and his relationship to Indigenous knowledge holders has been a real guiding light for this project. Also, John Mukeni Namai and Mara Menzies, 2 fantastic Kenyan storytellers. Chris Gregory, podcast editor extraordinaire. And I want to make a special mention to Kip Kiplagat from ICPAC, whose film and photos and recordings you will be hearing more of. So I'm going to hand you over to Cath to just tell you a bit more about how the project came about.
Hi, yeah, I'm Cath. I'm one of the project co-leads together with Naomi and Hannah on the UK side and Linda and Calistus on the Kenya side. So, you know, just how did it come to be that a storytelling company, Adverse Camber, is in collaboration with ICPAC, which is a climate centre which provides climate information and information about the applications of climate information to 11 East African countries. It came about because we are both interested in the role of storytelling in the climate crisis, and particularly how storytelling might have a lot to offer as an art form, but also as a communication tool and as a tool for dialogue, to tell really pressing stories of climate crisis in the Horn of Africa and how people are adapting to that, and to share knowledge around that. So we'd really like to start by hearing from each partner and why this question is important to them, this question of what is the role of storytelling.
So from
over to you, Naomi.
Adverse Camber's point of view on this is, you know, we're an artistic production company specialising in storytelling. We work with professional storytellers in the UK. We create live shows that bring legends, folktales, epics, true stories to life with music very often, produce those and tour them. We support storytellers with access to training and professional development, and we develop engagement projects mostly close to home in our Derbyshire base, where we listen to communities and make stories with them and share them. But we're also really keen to work strategically with partners and explore the range of roles that storytelling, even as an artistic form, can play in our modern culture. And we came into the project really keen to investigate the role of storytelling in relation to climate crisis and climate justice, and how best can we as a creative company respond to the need for system change. So our vision as a company is that other worlds are possible, and that stories can have a really active role in bringing those other worlds into being. And we know that many storytellers, certainly here in the UK, are doing really valuable work in this field. But the thinking can sometimes be restricted to kind of repertoire choice. What stories are we telling? Are they sending the right messages? And we're also really aware that there's some voices that we are not always hearing in the climate debate. So in the UK, you know, we're protected from some of the worst impacts of climate change, but our history and culture is very implicated in the story of how that's all come to be. So we were really keen to learn from and act with the communities that are most affected. And we're thinking about being curious really whether storytellers in those communities are finding ways to make sense of the situation, and could we create some connections between those storytellers and people working in the global south with the global north, and strengthen the sense of community and solidarity to act together. So as the creative team formed around the project, working with Cath and Hannah, who both were bringing ecological justice perspectives, social imagination perspectives, and then reaching out to Linda and ICPAC and their research around Indigenous knowledge holders, which, you know, is a very different value system and knowledge system, which we want to recognise, amplify the value of. We came into it as Adverse Camber with a lot of questions and areas to investigate, and we're very grateful that British Council responded to that idea of a research project. So we didn't really set out with sort of fixed aims in mind of we're going to create this, we're going to create a podcast. I'm very grateful to them for giving us the space to have those creative discussions about what would be useful, which we'll get into more about through these next sessions. So all the way through, it's been challenging to us to think and work differently internationally, working across arts and science, bridging those two different ways of looking at the world, and all the time asking, what are the stories that we need to be telling? How do we find them? How do we frame them? How do we share them? Who needs to hear them? And how can we equip storytellers and work best ourselves as a company to create the change that we want to make? So that's what we kind of brought in to the project. And at this point, we will hand over to Linda from ICPAC and then Calistus to tell us more about their perspective.
Thank you, Naomi. From ICPAC's perspective, we are a climate center, like Catherine has said. We specialize in producing climate information, so we have a lot of meteorologists on the team. We work with different sectors, so we have hydrologists to understand what it means to the water sector, food security experts to understand what climate means to the food security space, and various other key sectors that are impacted by climate. And so the reason why we partnered with, or were curious when Adverse Camber reached out, is one of the things that scientists, of climate scientists, are always been accused of, or one of the barriers been identified in terms of why climate information is not leading to climate action, is the limitation in the understanding or communication of the science. So we're always looking for new communication tools, new ways to be able to reach a wider audience, because we work with different decision makers from a regional level where we deal with policymakers, but climate information is also relevant to national actors and also eventually to communities as well. So what we've been trying to do at least is to find out what are the different ways that we can reach different people with different levels of capacity, different levels of interest. How can we capture a different audience that we're not capturing now? And I'll hand over to Calistus to tell us more, because he worked with the storytellers.
Thank you, Linda, for that introduction. Usability of climate products is a big challenge to most communities in the world. And it led us to partner with the Adverse Chambers to travel to our community in Kenya, in northern Kenya. And this part of the world is that is one of the tribe places in Kenya, and it connects with the other three countries. So it connects with the Ethiopia, Uganda, and South Sudan. So I had an opportunity to travel with the storytellers, because most of the time we have been working with. So when we were just moving around from Nairobi to that particular place, I could see how the weather was changing on the way, how it was affecting the livelihoods. And when we reached in Lodwar in Turkana, the headquarters of Turkana County, we realized that there are so many changes that has happened on the way. Compare with the extratropics UK is very, very different. And some of these challenges normally affect the weather forecasters when they are predicting, and even the users themselves, because sometimes you say it will rain, but it will only rain to a confined places. So through engagement with the storytellers, and I realized so many things that we have been missing in the past. First, our interest was to find out how the communities have been surviving even before independence, now, and what they think about the weather, how they are adapting, what kind of methods are they using to adapt to these extreme weather events. I realized that these communities, first they used to adapt by moving around the countries, the 4 countries. When the weather is very extreme on their part, they go to different countries. But some things changed when we started having a population increase, competition of pasture and water, and we have political boundaries coming in. And I realized that the storytellers, I think they are very keen. First, when it comes to engaging the community, they take a different aspect. First, they are very simple people, very, very affable people to work with. The community feels relaxed, and the way they could introduce them to the community, I found it very, very interesting. First, they could start with their own stories and even sing for the community. And by just singing to the community so much relaxed, enjoyed the music, and we ended up having so many community singing for us. And through that, we established that they now opened up. And even through the songs, we could categorize those particular songs. Some were after harvest, after having rainfall, maybe wedding songs, maybe after raiding, coming with the animals home, they sing those particular songs. And we realized that through listening to their songs, you could find that even establish the extreme weather events that have happened with the time and how they have tried to cope with those particular extreme events. So it was very, very interesting. And I want to believe that our storytellers really dug enough and get a lot of information from them. But one aspect is that these people, apart from adapting, they had on their forecasting tools, early warning, because they also believe in early warning. So they had their own tools of forecasting. And most of them, they were relying on looking at the intestines of animals and be able to tell what is likely to happen. But still there was a level of uncertainty. And even uncertainty is also in the modern science that we normally use. And that is an area that we need to work together to see the best way to work with them, get more knowledge from them, and also improve on our science on how to make sure that we come up with climate information and deliver it in a special way that can reach them to make decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Calistus and Linda. Was there anything more you wanted to add before we hear a little bit about the next project partner, Joseph, and go down?
I think from my part, Calistus has basically said it well. We talk about drought, but the storytellers let us know what that drought means to everyday people. We're beginning to think about what's the impact of climate on mental health, for example, so that the numbers that we report as scientists begin to have a human face, and such that the policies that are being made in the climate space are made to affect everyday people. And the best way, we are not trained as scientists to give the stories for the everyday people. So from the ICPAC side, what we learned as a regional institution is the need for us as a scientific institution to engage with the storytelling community.
Thank you very much, Linda and Calistus. And I just want to add that, you know, this project has several roots. And one of those was an article that we read that Linda had written some years ago about that need to learn from storytelling, but more specifically also from Indigenous knowledge, and to learn from the ways that Indigenous climate forecasting is meeting people's needs in remote climate frontline communities in a way that regional scientific weather forecasting wasn't managing to reach. It was managing to bring people together in community and to not only receive locally relevant information, but also work out how to act upon it. And that's been the spirit that you've brought to this project from the beginning. And we've learned so much from the journey you've already been on with that question. Another of the roots of the project is in another country, is in South Sudan. And I'm just checking, but I think that Joseph Ngordeng, our journalist colleague in South Sudan, has not managed to join us. He's been trying to get on board, but connectivity has been a problem throughout this project. And that's just worth noting that we've continued across oceans in this project, despite a lot of connection problems and bureaucratic problems, and just the sheer difficulty. You know, one of the biggest difficulties in hearing stories from the climate front lines is just that it's literally hard to get to hear them, because people in these communities experience difficulties such as very poor internet access, and that's affected Joseph today. So I'll just say a few words about him, and hopefully we can bring him in if he manages to connect by the end of the webinar, as I know he is trying to do. So Joseph Ngordeng is a community journalist. He directs community radio stations. He has done that for many years. I would say he's a campaigning journalist, and he's deeply, deeply interested in climate and in how to bring climate information to the communities that need it the most, because they need to make decisions about where to bring their cattle, what and when to plant. And he has been building very carefully relationships with rainmakers, with traditional knowledge holders who have traditional ways of predicting the weather, as Calistus was describing there, through attending to nature, through reading the intestines of animals, through ritual, and through a very attuned attentiveness to what they observe in the world around them. And Joseph's been building those relationships and building bridges really between traditional knowledge holders and the radio station and scientific weather forecasters, because he, through these friendships he was building, became aware that traditional rainmakers really wanted to collaborate and learn from scientific meteorologists, just as Linda has just explained, the scientific meteorologists want to learn in the opposite direction. And Joseph's very interested in how those forms of knowledge need to come together to help communities devise their approaches to meeting the challenges of the climate crisis. So I do hope we'll be able to hear from him before the end. But for now, I'm going to hand you over to the two also extremely important people in this project, that is our storytellers. John Mukeni Namai and Mara Menzies, who will tell a bit more about the journey they went on with Calistus and with Edwin Kiplagat, the ICPAC filmmaker, to northern Kenya not very long ago. Thank you.
Oh, welcome, Cath. And hello, everybody. My name is John Namai. I'm a storyteller based in Kenya.
And hi, everybody. I am Mara, and I am here at the Kenyan coast currently.
So actually, what did we do? I and Mara, together with the awesome ICPAC team, we traveled to the north of our country to experience how communities are are experiencing climate change and learning and adapting to it. And one of the greatest experience was also meeting the rainmakers. And as we know, climate stories are very complex and have many threads tied into it. We also worked with, as Cath just mentioned, Joseph Ndeng, who is a South Sudanese journalist who has been researching on rainmakers, and we got insights from him. And what was the greatest learnings of the project, like while we were traversing the both counties of West Pokot and Turkana, was the old and new ways working together. It was a great experience to see how the old and new ways were working together.
Okay, so yes, it was like a really magical experience actually being there, really interesting as well, and a gift to have ICPAC and Calistus and the whole team who are really able to share their experiences from previous visits, as well as of course meeting the teams in Turkana and in West Pokot. But what was really lovely about this is that we've been able to come out with 3 creative inputs. So there is the film that ICPAC will be using, because just as Linda and Calistus have spoken about, there are different ways of engaging and sharing the knowledge about the work that's being done. But then equally with Adverse Camber and the British Council, the creation of the 2 podcasts that are released. And the first podcast is the Storytellers podcast, which came about in a secondary way. And this was in very close collaboration with Hannah McDowell, who unfortunately isn't here, but was a major input into that process of crafting the podcast, which was essentially John and I's experiences on this particular journey of meeting the communities, of seeing how they are facing incredible challenges, not just climate change, but also the transition from an old way of life into a new way of life, and everything that accompanies that, and particularly how they are able to interact with science in a, which I think for one of them was, somebody had described one of the tools that the scientists were using as the glass box. So there's an understanding of the different things that are it's another language for exploring how to predict the rain or how to deal with certain situations, but in a language that is different from the one that they currently use. So the first podcast, the Storytellers podcast, is really about our own particular experiences and looking at things from a slightly different perspective. And then there is, of course, the listening to the Rainmakers podcast, and that is really looking at it from a different perspective, and that is more the voices of Joseph in the communities with ICPAC. It's a series of 8 episodes, so it's going into things in a lot more detail, and really just sort of exploring issues that probably were from before our particular experiences out in the field, but then also the work that has been continuing over many years. So those are the 2 different podcasts, and then the film as well. So really useful to be able to be, really wonderful to be able to be part of that, and then to be able to share our own different experiences and see how storytelling and science together with the community could really kind of open up different ways of conversation. I'm going to pass over to Chris. Chris was responsible for editing the podcast. He was working very closely with Cath, and Cath created the Listening to the Rainmakers podcast. So Chris, if you could maybe talk about a little bit how we were working remotely with you as well.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Mara. Really nice to see you again. And you, John. My name's Chris Gregory. I run an spoken word audio production company called Alternative Stories. We have a global top 5% podcast called Alternative Stories and Fake Realities, which is all about, as the name suggests, telling stories from different angles, different perspectives. So this project was very much in the sort of ballpark that we like to play in, and we're going to be sharing that storytelling podcast that Mara's just been talking about on that platform as well. So it's going to reach a big audience in United States, Australia, New Zealand, and the English-speaking countries around the world where our podcast is heard, which is really important, I think. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, as audio engineers always will, about sound and what you can expect from the podcasts. As Mara's mentioned, we have a series of 8 podcasts which talk about different aspects of John and Mara's journey and about climate change in the part of Africa that they were visiting. And we also have this one-off storytelling podcast, which it was a huge pleasure to work with Hannah McDowell on that one. That one really emphasizes, I think, the magic of storytelling, actually, and the power of storytelling. And without giving too much away, because I hope you're all going to go off and listen to it very soon. You know, you're going to hear some storytelling there. You're going to hear some of the skill, I think, of what people like John and Mara can actually do with stories. And sound's a great medium to share stories and you know, distribute these podcasts, share them as widely as you can, because they really do deserve to be heard. A little bit then about some of the vagaries of recording on location. And I mean, unfortunately, we've seen one today because we haven't been able to hear from Joseph. Imagine the fun trying to record a pretty dodgy Zoom call from Juba, where John went to try and get the best possible wireless connection, and it really wasn't that great. So we've had to do quite a bit of editing of the Zoom calls that we recorded. Then, of course, on location, we were hearing from not only our speakers, our storytellers, but also the local wildlife. You will hear birds in the background, you'll hear animals in the background. Some of the recording was done at a music festival with a live band in the background. All of that, the instinct, I think, of an audio engineer is to try and make the audio as pristine as possible. But I think during the process, I realized fairly quickly that a lot of the magic and the color and the immersive nature of the audio we were getting would actually come across really well in the podcast. So we hope that on the bits that were recorded on location, you really will feel transported. So get a pair of these on as you listen, and you'll really be able to actually imagine yourself on location with John, Mara, Calistus, and Joseph as you're listening to their voices. I would say that we had hours and hours and hours of audio to work through, and Cath and Hannah did an amazing and sterling job in going through all of that audio and selecting the bits that we actually used. We could have made probably 800 episodes rather than the 8 that we made with all that we had. And some of you may have got a bit bored after that, after 100 or so. So we've edited it right down, and we really hope you enjoy what you hear. Now, I know that this is about a podcast series, but we have mentioned also a film. So, you know, ears are one thing, eyes are another one. We have a video that you're about to see. There's a trailer video, which I really hope that if you see it on Twitter or Instagram or wherever it's shared, if you could share it also, that will help to get the word across. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Cath, who will introduce the video.
Thanks so much, Chris. Yes, this is a short trailer for all the podcasts and the film by Jamie MacDonald, working with Jenny Babenko of Adverse Camber. And I think Naomi's just queuing it up for you.
Siervellón
Thanks so much, Naomi. I think that's just a great example of very compact storytelling. But as Chris pointed out there, the material that came back from this incredibly rich field trip and from all of Joseph's stories, all of John and Mara's stories, all of Calistus's impressions and realizations from the trip, there was a huge amount of material. And I'm aware from the chat that there are a lot of journalists in the room and people who work in comms and storytellers in different forms who try to take complex stories from the real world and turn them into that magic thing that is a story worth telling and that people can listen to and attend to. And we have, although we don't have Hannah, my fellow co-lead, here in person today, she has recorded a little video talking about how we did that transformation, how she particularly in the Storytellers podcast made that transformation happen into a story that we can listen to as reality, but also as a gift.
And so the process was to try and find how we stitch these threads into something of a tumbling river of insight. It's not sewn up tightly, I'd say. And that process was to find some meaning-making themes and to use those to structure it. So we have a number of beginnings, because there's not just one beginning, there's many beginnings to this story. There's a colonial beginning, there's an indigenous beginning with rain-making technology. There's the beginning of a digital technology that makes information much more accessible, but also separates generations. And there's the beginning of the climate change situation. So there are all these beginnings. So we start out by exploring the beginnings, and then we go into the middles. And then we ask our questions about the ends. But rather than one story, as in one beginning, one middle, one end, there are threads that we're braiding together. And that was the process. But in order to give us a really strong image at the center, because that's what a story needs, we went looking for a traditional story that would help us to think about these threads in a coherent way, would be like a guide, would be like a compass for us as we were understanding this meaning-making process of the people that John and Mara spoke to. So we found a beautiful story from West Africa, actually, rather than from East Africa, which had within it an image and a metaphor that carries the meaning through the story. And I don't want to give too much away now, but when we were holding the complexity of these threads, we needed something solid in the middle there to hold it. And it's not in some ways a finished article, this podcast. It's one try, and our stories are always one try, because there are many ways we can tell a story, and all these ways are true. So I wanted to just share a little with you about that process. And of course, I did that in partnership with John and Mara. And it was Mara who found that Nigerian story to put at the center.
Thank you. And when you listen to the podcast, you'll hear that story and how it holds together many of the complex threads that are being braided together into cloth in the podcast. We want to share some of what we've learned from making this podcast together. It's been a tremendous learning journey of about 18 months duration. And we think that the best way to do that is to share a snippet of the podcast for you. It's from the Storytellers podcast. And the snippet we've chosen is the bit that Chris trailed already, saying that it's got a live band in the background and it's filmed at a festival. It's at the Lokiriama Peace Festival. You might want to Google it later on. It's a brilliant and an inspiring event. It's been taking place ever since the early 1970s to mark the peace accord between neighboring countries who are sharing resources in a region where water and pasture are scarce, and so conflict is frequent. And the way we came to understand this festival is that it's part of the way people have been adapting to climate change for decades. Sometimes in the global north, we have a bit of a tendency to talk about climate crisis as being a future, maybe a near future, but a future event. And what's become abundantly clear in this process is that for the communities that we've been meeting with in these podcasts, climate change has been happening since the 1970s and 80s in a way that they could perceive on an everyday basis, and it has been making life difficult and making their traditional knowledge systems strain at the edges for decades. And the Lokiriama Peace Festival is the place where the weapons were buried by all of the warring parties in a conflict over resources at the border. And then there's a festival at this burial place every year. And it's a great coming together of different cultural influences, of ideas, of new music, of young people's influences. It's an opportunity for dialogue. It's an opportunity to not only celebrate, but keep developing the peace between these brother and sister nations at the border. So we hope you enjoy this extract.
Psych, psych, panda, psych, psych, panda, panda. In the Messy Middle, an annual festival which remembers and celebrates a peace accord, which started in 1978, brings delegations from all the neighboring nations bordering Turkana. They come to renew their commitment to one another to keep peace. Riverbeds as the center stage for the festival. The sky, trees giving backdrop. Crowds of communities colored in various red ochre clay. Cars of government officials streaming in to honor the event. Men and ladies adorned with jingles and trumpets, reaching up to several hundred people from different neighboring wards and sub-counties within Turkana region. Clearly, the weapons of war buried underneath a decorated structure of art at the base of the peace accord.
Songs, stories and music joyfully celebrating peace fill the air. The audiences arrive amidst the dust joining the throng, the magnificence of the Atakere peoples dressed in their splendor, soldiers in arms to ensure that peace prevails.
The role of a festival is vital for the coming together of diverse communities. It is good for communities to come together and share moments, celebrate, commemorate shared values, understanding, and also give back to the rural economy. This is a place where arts can flourish and bring people together, and the artists have important messages to share through what they make. We spoke to one musician who had created a piece of music about peace. This is what he was saying through it.
So that's the key message is, let us have development with peace. There is no way you can have peace. No, there is no way you can have development without peace. Yeah, that's the key message.
Sasa ningependa tu wimbo moja ingine ya kumsifu mama. Na nataka wamama wakuja hapa wakimsaidia kuimba. Ndio mama.
Bila no, hapana ngaraka mimi to mi tumnya pa yote nda minya ba ibo mon clinic. Bas, agora vai. Yeah, kizasina mama chilo keto. Ay, kizasin Kristina mama. Oh, kizasin te plati yo. Ya ver ya magule, lazin zer bel gogolo. Ya ver ya magule, e vole Kristina.
So I'd like to hand over to John and Mara to reflect on that little extract as a way of sharing some of what we've learned really from experiences such as the Lokoriama Peace Festival.
Well, thank you, Cath. And it was a really nice festival, and people should make a point to come to visit. And we are looking at holding complexities. Like you find many stories of climate change, how to tell them in a way that honors the reality whilst making them relatable. For example, like you find storytellers finding many ways to tell climate stories. For example, we could find we had the pastoralist angle, whereby we find reduced rainfall has made pasture to become less and made the pastoralists to migrate. For example, like while we were in Turkana and West Pokot, especially West Pokot, 75% of the cattle were not there. They had gone to their sister county, which was in Uganda. And also you'll find likewise the other side of Turkana, we couldn't see cattle. Even when we tried to go to Lokichar, the pastoralists had moved deeper to look for pasture. And also we could look at the adaptation angle. Like we witness communities, like what we talked when talking with the government officials, we witness how communities are adapting. For example, changing traditional practices, like the communities are being encouraged to stop the practice of having many cattle, but to have lesser cattle that are well fed, and also taking the children to school is also helping. And also some initiatives within the conflict regions, like we have the triangle schools, whereby two warring communities, their children are being, there are schools that are built on the border, whereby they are learning together to try to diffuse this animosity within the communities. So there were lots of angles that we saw.
Yeah, and then just to follow on from that as well, sort of looking at it from the conflict angle, there's histories between the different peoples where there's the brotherhood or the sisterhood before, and there was an expectation of shared resources, but with climate change, how those resources are becoming more scarce. Now the conflict is increasingly violent. So it's kind of looking at those sorts of angles and what the communities are doing in order to be able to challenge that or be able to work alongside that. It's looking at the other things that have affected them. For example, the nationalization of borders, whereas historically there were no borders, so therefore the peoples would cross over, whereas now the national borders almost legitimize prevention of movement of pastoralist peoples. So there are many challenges that the people are facing. John, back to you.
Yeah, so like there were many things that we observed, and learnings, and the ways the communities are trying to adapt on climate change, and also like their stories. Also, there was a time that we would get the women, like also the women wanted also to have their stories really listened to, and also was interesting, like the women also understood the way of reading climate change, like in West Pokot, like the young women, we had a sitting with them. They also they were like rainmakers, which sometimes we say rainmaking is like it's all about the men. Also the women are able to understand and observe nature and also to predict. So it was an awesome experience crisscrossing those two counties, West Pokot and Turkana, and also hearing from the other side of South Sudan, from Joseph, how the practice of rainmaking is honored in Sudan.
Yes, but not only in Sudan, but I thought, one of the things that I found really interesting was when we had moved from Turkana down to West Pokot, there was Stanley who worked with in the meteorology department who was not from West Pokot, and we'd asked that conversation as to there might have been a bias that if you come from a particular cultural background, then maybe it's easier to incorporate the beliefs of other people and the cultural practices and the rainmaking practices of other people, and what does that look like if you're somebody who is coming in from a completely different ethnic group. And it was really fascinating because he had been there for 9 years, and from being Nandi, the way of predicting rain was by reading the beer, and so when he went there, he was a little bit skeptical about the reading of the mara, the goat's intestines, but then he said, after a while I've been here, and actually there are definitely similarities. There are definitely things that actually work, that coincide with the readings from the scientific tools. So I thought it was really fascinating that actually they put as much credence to the science as it is working with the traditional rainmakers, and also understanding how the knowledge travels, because the rainmakers have huge influence, and so by ignoring them and by keeping them out of the conversation, actually a lot of the information does not carry. So everybody plays their own particular role, and by working together, then there's possibly a way that we can move things further into the future.
Thank you so much, John and Mara, for sharing some of that real vividness around how complex this whole situation is, and how you as storytellers try to hold that and share it with communities. I think it's very important in this project that we had two storytellers in the artistic sense of the word, John and Mara, involved in the project, and then we also had the journalist Joseph Ngordeng, who unfortunately has continued to have connectivity problems and has sent his sincere apologies for not managing to be here. But I do hope that there's so much expertise in this room. I've seen from the chat so many people who are working with these complex stories in the same way as John and Mara have been doing. And it would be so wonderful to learn from you and to be in discussion with you at the workshops we've coming up, which Naomi will give the details to at the end. Just really to conclude by sharing a few last learnings from the project. Yes, and in response to the question in the chat, yes, I think we'll try and share some words from Joseph with everybody if that's possible. So some final insights really that we feel we've gained from this project is that a storyteller is not the same as a journalist, although both communicate and share stories with communities. Storytelling has this potential to connect with people and to be a mutual process, a reciprocal process of learning. It can also open up spaces and potential for different kinds of conversations. Calistus did observe when he returned from the trip, I remember that when John and Mara had started with a traditional story, everybody's ears had pricked up, the mood had lightened, people had started to laugh, some music was played, and suddenly we were in a slightly different zone where people were more free and honest with their communication, where hierarchies started to be less important, and people were able to think perhaps in a freer way. I don't know if you want to add a brief comment about that, Calistus, because it was interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. What I noticed is that as much as we have extreme weather, extreme harsh events, I think music brings on board some kind of relief. First, I noticed in Rokriama in the peace accord, the music and the songs are being used as in conflict resolution. It rallies people to come together. It communicates messages. First, it looks what used to happen in the past, then the current, and the community use that music to communicate to the leadership and to other people what they think that is so valid to them. They are talking about education, they are talking about water, they are talking about the road, because you find that a place where you could just travel. In other areas, you could just use like maybe £1. There you are using like £10 because of road transport system is not good. Then apart from that, there is also appreciation and love in the community. The guy who is singing that song is a love song about Christina, is communicating, and you could just see how the members, both men and women, how they appreciate and how they feel. They feel so happy. Everything is not bad. There is some space for some good opportunity, good space for enjoyment in that particular community. And music is bringing hope, to the community. Then engagement, okay? It shapes, it brings people together, and you could see the kids, men, women, the old, it rallies them together. And through that, there is some kind of cross engagement, okay? In fact, now it goes beyond the households. Now because this community we have, they speak the same language. We have community in Ethiopia, in South Sudan, in Uganda and Kenya, they speak the same language. So music now is being used as a communication medium to those particular communities because of climate change extremes, pasture and water is scarce. So they coined that music so that they rally them to share the little resources they have, either water and pasture. So music is very, very important to that particular community.
Thank you so much, Calistus. And that links really nicely actually to the final learning that I wanted to share, which is that when climate change is rapid, people start to get confused about what story they're living in. The stories they have been living in for generations don't hold water as much anymore. So for example, pastoralist communities might be stuck with an image of themselves with cows at the center of their society, a pastoralist story of themselves that just can't be made to work anymore because of climate change. And then perhaps the clarion call of the city, a more modern story that involves school-based education and urban jobs, but that maybe also seems unreachable and would take them away from their relationship with the land they belong to. So people can be stuck between stories is a thing that we really have learned in this process. And urgently, they need to create new stories that bring together the old and new, and the scientific and the traditional knowledge, and the knowledge of old people and young people, the knowledge of men and women and elders and traditional knowledge holders. And that is a role for storytellers as well, to create the space in communities for the shaping of those new stories of the future. There's people in the chat here talking about the way they're doing that in their own localities as well, trying to envision sustainable futures that will help us all to adapt and respond to what's coming. Which are some of the themes we'll be exploring in the 2 workshops that are coming up, and we'll have a lot of chance to learn from each other's experience with doing that. So that's all from me. I thank you so much for coming, and I hand over to Naomi to share with you some of those details about the workshops and the podcasts.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Cath, and thanks to everybody who's been here today, and thanks to Joseph, who absolutely would have been here if he could, and hopefully will be joining us for these sessions coming up. So we've talked about the podcast a lot. We are now going to share the links with you so that you can go and listen to them. But just before we do that, I just want to reflect that, you know, one of the hearts of this project has been this exploration, conversation, learning, friendship that's developed between the people working on the project. And that's why we really wanted to have more opportunities to gather with you and with other people who are working in these spaces. So we've got 2 2-hour sessions coming up, one this Friday and one the following Friday. This Friday session is a creative space for storytellers. So that's whether you're an artistic storyteller, a journalistic storyteller, an activist storyteller, or working with stories in any way. And we'll be looking at some of the challenges and opportunities of telling these complex stories, as Cath and everybody has been talking about. We've got some experiences from this project to share, but we're also really interested in hearing from your experiences, your questions, your insights, and the kind of collective conversation that we can have around that. So they are 2 hours so that there is time for small group discussions to happen. That session this Friday is 11 till 1 in the UK, or 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock in Kenya, and it's in association with Settle Stories, so thanks to them for allowing us to host it together. And then the following Friday, Friday the 19th of May, is Meeting the Activists. We will be hearing more from Joseph at that session about his research and engagement with communities in South Sudan. And then also Danny Calamera from the Grounded Imaginaries project at the University of Sydney, which is sharing examples of alternative futures in Australia and India. Now that one is 10 till 12 in the UK, or 12 till 2 if you're in Kenya. And that's in association with Georgia at Evans Centre for Storytelling at University of South Wales, and thanks very much to them for that. So you can book into those sessions now. It's free if you're from Kenya or the Global South. We are asking people in the UK or Global North to pay. It's £10, but if cost is an obstacle, do get in touch with us. And if there's anything that you are really wanting to bring to those sessions or to discuss at those sessions, then do get in touch with us. We have a plan, but we really want to hear from you. So if there's something you'd like to bring, do get in touch, and we really hope to see you there. So with that, I will just copy and paste my links, which will give you access to the podcasts. You can listen to the podcast in your glorious headphones, as Chris suggested. You can also watch them on YouTube. And that link there, just posted in the chat, should give you access to the podcast now live on our website page. They're also on the Spotify channel at ICPAC. You can book into the sessions on this Friday or the following Friday. And if you've got any questions, anything else that you'd like to tell us about or hear about, do get in touch with the email there. I cannot believe it's 1 minute to 3. That is absolutely fantastic, because we wanted to really respect your time. And so, yeah, please do join us again. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you to everybody who's been part of this project. And thank you for joining us today. Also, I will just say we will be making the recording available. So if you want to listen back or share it with other people, this session you can. We'll just stay on the line for a minute here. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.